For 11 years, I dug through the trash bins behind the largest shopping mall in Ohio. People called me Trash Can Timmy. Teenagers threw empty soda cans at my head for sport. My own brother, who managed a department store inside that mall, told security to escort me off the property if I came within 50 feet of his entrance. Last month, the mall went bankrupt. The banks were about to demolish it. And at the foreclosure auction, I raised my paddle and bid $800 million. The look on my brother's face when he realized that the homeless man he'd been avoiding was actually the owner, that's the moment I've been waiting for my entire life. My name is Timothy Tim Gardner. I'm 62 years old. And this is the story of how I hid $1 billion fortune inside garbage cans for over a decade. I was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1962. My father was a welder at a factory that made brake pads. My mother stayed home and drank gin from coffee mugs. We lived in a two-bedroom ranch house with a leaky roof and a lawn that was mostly dirt. I had one sibling, an older brother named Kevin. Kevin was handsome, athletic, and cruel. He told me I was adopted until I was 12. I wasn't. He just liked watching me cry. My father died when I was 19, lung cancer. He smoked 3 packs a day and never went to a doctor until he was coughing up blood. The funeral cost $6,000. Kevin said he couldn't afford to help because he was investing in his future. I worked 3 jobs that year: washing dishes at a diner, stocking shelves at a grocery store, and cleaning kennels at a veterinary clinic. I paid for the funeral myself. Kevin showed up late wearing sunglasses and left before the graveside service. That was our relationship. Kevin took. I gave. Kevin shined. I sweated. In 1985, a developer announced plans to build a massive shopping mall on the outskirts of Columbus. It would be called the Gardens Mall: 3 stories, 200 stores, a food court the size of a football field, and a parking lot for 5,000 cars. It was going to be the largest retail complex in the Midwest. Everyone wanted a piece of it, including Kevin. Kevin had married a woman named Cheryl whose father owned a chain of shoe stores. Through that connection, Kevin landed a job as a floor manager at a department store called Hartley's that was one of the anchor tenants. He wore suits. He carried a briefcase. He told our mother that I was still figuring things out. I wasn't figuring anything out. I was working as a janitor at a public library, making minimum wage, living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. But I had one thing Kevin didn't have: I watched. Every night after the library closed, I would walk around the Gardens Mall. It was still under construction. The walls were plywood, the floors were concrete, but I could see what it was going to become, and I could see what it was missing. Nobody had built a dedicated maintenance and storage facility. The mall had loading docks, sure, but no central location for repair crews, replacement parts, or parking for service vehicles. It was a small oversight. But small oversights cost big money over time. I had saved $15,000 from my janitor job. It took me 8 years to save that much. Most people would have put it in a retirement account. I put it into a company I called Gardner Maintenance Solutions. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mother. I incorporated in Delaware, where records are private. I hired a lawyer named Miriam Schwartz who worked out of a strip mall office and wore the same purple blazer every day. She thought I was crazy, but she took my money. I pitched the Gardens Mall's ownership group on a contract for after-hours maintenance. I bid low, too low really. I knew I would lose money for the first 2 years, but I also knew that once I was inside I could prove my value. They gave me the contract. It was worth $70,000 a year. I kept my janitor job for another 18 months, working double shifts, sleeping 4 hours a night, then I quit. By 1990, Gardner Maintenance had 23 employees. By 1995, we had 97 employees. We weren't just cleaning the mall anymore. We were servicing HVAC systems, repairing escalators, managing waste disposal. I had contracts with 3 other malls in Ohio and one in Indiana. I was making 7 figures, and I was still driving a 1987 Ford Ranger with a dented tailgate. I didn't want flash. I wanted freedom. And I wanted to watch. Kevin, meanwhile, had been promoted to store manager at Hartley's. He saw me sometimes in the early mornings checking on my crews. He never said hello. He once told a coworker, loud enough for me to hear, "That guy used to clean library toilets. Now he cleans mall toilets. Some people just don't have ambition." I said nothing. I smiled. I kept walking. In 2001, the Gardens Mall was sold to a real estate investment trust for $400 million. The new owners wanted to renegotiate all service contracts. They tried to cut my rates. I refused. They threatened to find someone else. I showed them my portfolio of 3 other malls and reminded them that I could walk away and leave them scrambling. We settled on a 5-year deal worth $3 million annually. That same year, I incorporated a holding company called Titan Properties. I started buying small parcels of land near the mall. Empty lots, abandoned gas stations, a closed-down Pizza Hut, nothing fancy, but all of it within a half-mile radius of the Gardens Mall. Why? Because I had a theory. I had been watching the retail market for 20 years. I saw the early signs of decline. Online shopping was growing. Big box stores were struggling. The value of the mall itself wasn't in the stores anymore, it was in the land. The land could be redeveloped: condos, offices, a medical campus, but only if you owned the right parcels. By 2010, Titan Properties owned 43 acres surrounding the Gardens Mall. I had paid an average of $70,000 per acre. Total investment about $3 million. The mall's ownership group had no idea, because I never bought in my own name. Every parcel was held by a different LLC. Some were registered to my lawyer's office. Some were held in trust. I looked like a scattered collection of small investors. Nobody connected the dots. Then in 2015, everything changed. The Gardens Mall's anchor tenant, Hartley's department store, announced it was closing all its locations nationwide. Kevin lost his job. He was 57 years old, too young to retire, too old to start over. He blamed everyone except himself. The economy, the president, his wife, his employees. He never blamed Hartley's for failing to adapt. He never blamed his own mismanagement, and he certainly never blamed himself for treating me like garbage for 30 years. Kevin came to me for the first time in my adult life. He showed up at my office, a modest storefront in a strip mall that still had the same cracked parking lot as when I started. He looked older, tired. The suit was off the rack now. The briefcase was scuffed. He asked if I could help him find a job. I said, Kevin, I've been working since I was 16 years old. I've never asked you for anything. You've never offered. You've called me names. You've laughed at me behind my back, and now you want me to help you. He got defensive. He said I was being unfair. He said we were brothers. He said family should stick together. I told him I would think about it. He left. He didn't call to follow up. He didn't apologize. He went back to his house, which was in foreclosure, I later learned, and waited for someone else to save him. That's when I decided I wasn't going to help Kevin. Not directly, but I was going to do something that would affect him whether he liked it or not. I was going to buy the Gardens Mall. The opportunity came in 2018. The mall was losing money. Vacancy rates had climbed to 40%. The real estate investment trust that owned it was desperate to sell. They listed the property for $90 million. It was a fraction of what it had been worth a decade earlier. But I didn't have $90 million in cash. I had assets. I had land, I had a maintenance company that was profitable, and I had a plan. I brought in a partner, a developer named Sonia Vasquez, who had built mixed-use projects in Austin and Denver. Sonia was smart, aggressive, and completely unfazed when I told her my story. She laughed when I described Kevin. She said, Tim, I've seen families destroy each other over a lot less than a mall. You're doing this for the right reasons, not revenge, redemption. There's a difference. Sonia and I formed a joint venture. She would handle the construction and permitting. I would handle the financing and land assembly. We submitted a bid for the mall, $65 million. The REIT countered at $72 million. We settled at $68 million. I put up $12 million in cash. The rest came from a bank loan secured by my land parcels and my maintenance company's assets. On paper, I owned 41% of the joint venture. Sonia owned 39%. The remaining 20% was held by a group of silent investors. But I had structured the deal so that I had controlling interest through a separate voting agreement. I was the de facto owner of the Gardens Mall. The man who used to clean toilets now owned the building where those toilets were located. I didn't announce it. I didn't throw a party. I didn't even tell my mother, who was 89 years old and living in a nursing home that I paid for anonymously through a trust. I just kept showing up. Every morning at 4:30 a.m. I drove my 1987 Ford Ranger to the mall's loading dock. I walked the corridors before the stores opened. I talked to the janitors. I talked to the security guards. I knew their names, their kids' names, their problems, and every morning around 7:00 Kevin would arrive. He had found a new job as a greeter at a clothing store called Casual Corner on the second floor of the mall. He wore a red vest and a name tag. He looked miserable. He didn't see me. He never saw me. He walked past me on his way to the escalator, his eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders hunched. I was the owner of the building and he was an employee. He didn't know it, and I wasn't ready to tell him. COVID-19 pandemic hit in March of 2020. The Gardens Mall closed for 6 months. When it reopened, half the stores didn't come back. The food court was a ghost town. The escalators were shut off to save electricity. The parking lot, once a sea of cars, now held maybe 200 vehicles on a good Saturday. My maintenance contracts dried up. The mall's operating income collapsed. By the end of 2021, the Gardens Mall was losing $2 million a year. Sonia wanted to pull the trigger on redevelopment. Convert the mall into a mixed-use campus. Offices on the first floor, apartments on the second and third. A public plaza where the food court used to be. But the banks were nervous. Interest rates were rising. Construction costs had doubled. And the city council was dragging its feet on the zoning changes we needed. I called a meeting with Sonia and our attorneys. I said, what if we let the mall fail? What if we stop putting money into operations? Let the vacancy rate hit 80%. Let the REIT that still owns the ground lease get nervous. Then we buy them out at a discount. Sonia looked at me like I had grown a second head. Tim, that's called a hostile default. It's risky. They could sue us. I said, they could, but they won't because they're bleeding cash and we're the only buyer left. Nobody else wants a dying mall in a mid-sized Midwestern city, she agreed. Reluctantly, over the next 14 months we stopped maintaining common areas. The lights in the parking lot went out, the restrooms were locked, the escalators were barricaded. The mall looked abandoned even though 30 stores were still open. Tenants complained. We offered them lease buyouts. Half of them took the money and left. The other half stayed, mostly small businesses with nowhere else to go. Kevin was still there. Casual Corner had survived the purge. Kevin was now the assistant manager, a title that meant nothing since the store had only 3 employees. He looked older, grayer, he had lost weight. His wife Cheryl had left him in 2019 and moved to Florida with a retired pilot. His house had been foreclosed. He was living in a one-bedroom apartment across town, driving a 2012 Hyundai with a cracked windshield. I knew all of this because I had a private investigator follow him for 6 months. Not for revenge, for information. I needed to know what kind of man he had become. Was he still cruel, still arrogant, or had life humbled him? The investigator, a woman named Dana who used to work for the Columbus police, gave me her report. She said Kevin mostly kept to himself. He went to work, he went home, he watched TV, he didn't have friends, he didn't date. He called his ex-wife every Sunday, but she rarely answered. He had no one, and he had no idea that the brother he had mistreated for 50 years now owned the very floor he walked on. I felt something I didn't expect, not satisfaction, not pity, something in between, sorrow maybe, for what we could have been, for what my mother had wanted, two sons who stood together. Instead, we were strangers who shared DNA. In April of 2023, the Gardens Mall officially defaulted on its debt. The bank that held the primary mortgage filed a notice of foreclosure. The REIT that owned the ground lease declared bankruptcy. The mall was going to be auctioned off by the county in 6 months. I knew the auction date before anyone else because my attorney was friends with the clerk's office. September 15, 2023, 10 a.m., the Franklin County Courthouse. I started putting together my financing. The bank that had previously loaned me money was now skittish. They had lost faith in retail real estate. I had to find private investors. I reached out to old contacts. I sold some of my land parcels. I liquidated my maintenance company's non-essential assets. By August, I had $27 million in cash and a commitment for another $40 million from a private equity firm that specialized in distressed real estate. Total buying power, $67 million. The auction estimate for the mall was between $12 and $18 million. The property was so run down, so undesirable that most investors didn't even bother showing up. I knew I could win with a bid of $20 million, but I also knew something they didn't: the redevelopment plan. Once we had control of the property, Sonia and I would demolish 60% of the mall, build a medical office building and a luxury apartment complex, and lease the remaining retail space to a mix of local businesses and national chains. The projected value after redevelopment, $140 million. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and it required me to do something I had avoided for decades: step into the light. September 15th arrived. I woke up at 4 a.m. I put on a suit, not a fancy one, a navy blue suit from J.C. Penney that I had bought for my mother's funeral. I drove my Ford Ranger to the courthouse. I parked 3 blocks away and walked. The air was cool, the sky was clear. It felt like the first day of the rest of my life. The auction room was small, paneled walls, folding chairs, a man at the front with a gavel. There were maybe 15 people in the audience: real estate agents, rubberneckers, a reporter from the Columbus Dispatch, and Kevin was sitting in the back row wearing his Casual Corner vest. He looked confused. Why was he there? I found out later that Casual Corner's owner had sent him to observe the auction on behalf of the store's landlord. Kevin was just a messenger. He didn't know anything about real estate. He didn't know anything about me until he saw me walk in. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened slightly. He watched me walk to the front of the room and take a seat in the second row. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the auctioneer. The bidding started at $5 million. A man in a leather jacket bid 6. A woman in a business suit bid 7. I raised my paddle at 8. Leather jacket bid 9. I bid 10. Business suit dropped out. Leather jacket bid 11. I bid 12. He bid 13. I bid 14. He hesitated. The auctioneer called for 15. Silence. I raised my paddle to 15. Leather jacket shook his head. The gavel fell. I had bought the Gardens Mall for $15 million. The room applauded politely. I stood up. I turned around. Kevin was still sitting in the back row, his face pale, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. I walked over to him. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there waiting for him to speak. He said, "Tim, what are you doing here?" I said, "I just bought the mall, Kevin. I've owned the land around it for years. I've owned the maintenance company that kept it running. And now I own the whole thing, every store, every hallway, every bathroom, including the one where Casual Corner is located." He said, "No, you can't afford that. You drive a truck from the 1980s. You live in a rented apartment." I said, "I live in a house I own in Henderson, Nevada. I've owned it for 10 years. I drive the truck because I like it. And I've been worth over $50 million since 2015. You just never bothered to ask. You were too busy being ashamed of me." He started crying, not the quiet kind, the ugly kind, the kind where your whole body shakes and you can't catch your breath. People were staring. The reporter was taking notes. I put my hand on Kevin's shoulder and led him out of the room into the hallway. We sat on a bench outside the courthouse. The sun was bright. The leaves were starting to turn. I waited for him to speak. He said, "I was so mean to you all those years. I called you names. I told people you were nobody. I missed your wedding. Wait, you never got married. I missed your everything. I was so busy trying to look good that I never saw you." I said, "I know." He said, "Can you forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about the dumpsters I had climbed into, the nights I had slept 4 hours, the years of being invisible, the loneliness, the quiet. The slow, grinding work of building something while the people who were supposed to love you looked the other way. I said, "Kevin, I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'm willing to try, and I'm willing to give you a job, not because you deserve it, because I want to see what happens when you have to work for someone you used to look down on." He wiped his eyes. He nodded. He said, "I'll take it." I said, "Good, you start Monday. You're going to be my facilities coordinator. You'll be working alongside the janitors, the same janitors you used to tell security to chase away. I want you to learn their names, their stories, their struggles, and then I want you to come to me and tell me what you've learned." He said, "Yes." I stood up, I offered him my hand, he took it. It was the first time we had touched in 40 years. Started work that Monday. I watched him from my office, a converted storage room on the lower level that I had furnished with a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a coffee maker. He showed up at 6 a.m. wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He looked nervous. I had assigned him to the overnight cleaning crew third shift, not as punishment, as education. The crew leader was a woman named Dolores. She had been cleaning the Gardens Mall for 22 years. She had raised 3 children on her salary. She had never missed a day of work. She knew every leaky pipe, every flickering light fixture, every door that stuck in humid weather. Kevin had never spoken to her before. He had walked past her hundreds of times without seeing her. On his first night, Kevin pushed a mop for 8 hours. He emptied trash cans. He scrubbed toilets. He swept the food court. He came to my office at the end of his shift, exhausted, his hands raw. He sat down without being invited. He said, "I had no idea." I said, "No idea about what?" He said, "How hard this is, how tired they are. Dolores has arthritis in both knees. She's been mopping with a limp for 5 years, and nobody ever says thank you, nobody ever even looks at her." I said, "Now you know how I felt for 30 years. He nodded. He didn't argue, he just nodded. I kept him on the crew for 6 months. He learned every job, mopping, waxing, stripping floors, cleaning restrooms, hauling trash. He lost 15 pounds, his hands calloused. He stopped wearing cologne. He started eating lunch with the crew, sandwiches from home, not takeout from the food court. He learned Spanish so he could talk to the 2 custodians from Guatemala. He learned their names, their wives' names, their children's names. In March of 2024, I promoted him to assistant facilities manager. He now had an office next to mine. He wore a uniform. He still mopped on weekends because he said it helped him think. His relationship with Dolores had turned into a friendship. He helped her apply for disability benefits. He drove her to her doctor's appointments. He was becoming the person I had always hoped he could be, but the biggest test came in June. The redevelopment plan was ready. Sonia had finalized the permits. The construction crews were scheduled to start demolition in August. We needed to relocate the remaining tenants. Most of them agreed to move to temporary spaces or accept buyouts, but one tenant refused. Casual Corner. The owner of the franchise, a man named Gerald Pritzker, had decided to fight. He hired a lawyer. He filed a motion to block the demolition. He claimed that our lease agreement gave him the right to remain for another 3 years. He was wrong, but he had money, and he was willing to spend it to make our lives difficult. I called Kevin into my office. I told him the situation. I said, "Kevin, I need you to talk to Gerald. He knows you. You've worked for him for years. Maybe you can convince him to see reason." Kevin looked uncomfortable. He said, "Gerald is not a reasonable man. He's the one who told me to have you removed from the property. He said you were bad for business. He doesn't know that you own the mall. He just knows you as the janitor." I said, "Then tell him who I am. Tell him I own the building. Tell him I'm offering him a relocation package that includes a better location, free rent for 6 months, and a marketing allowance. If he refuses, we'll see him in court, and we'll win." Kevin took a deep breath. He said, "Okay, I'll do it." Days later, Kevin came back with a signed agreement. Gerald Pritzker had accepted the relocation package. He had also asked to meet me. Kevin set up the meeting in Casual Corner's stockroom, a cramped space filled with boxes of unsold merchandise. Gerald was a short man with a red face and a permanent scowl. He looked me up and down. He said, "So you're the janitor who owns the mall?" I said, "That's right." He said, "I owe you an apology. I treated you like garbage. We all did. Kevin told me what you've done for him, for Dolores, for the other workers. That's not what a janitor does. That's what a leader does." I said, "Thank you, but I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because someone needed to." He shook my hand, then he left. The demolition began on schedule. The Gardens Mall, or what was left of it, came down in a cloud of dust and rubble. The new construction went up quickly. By spring of 2025, the medical office building was open. The luxury apartments were leasing. The public plaza was filled with food trucks and families. The retail space was home to a bookstore, a coffee shop, a yoga studio, and yes, a casual corner. Kevin was promoted again. He was now the director of facilities for the entire development. He oversaw a team of 47 maintenance workers. He made more money than he had ever made at Hartley's. But he didn't brag about it. He didn't wear expensive suits. He didn't look down on anyone. One evening after the plaza had cleared and the lights were dim, Kevin and I sat on a bench near the fountain. He looked older, happier, calmer. He said, "Tim, I've been thinking. All those years I was mean to you. It wasn't really about you. It was about me. I was jealous. You had something I didn't have. You had grit. You had persistence. You had the ability to keep going when everyone said you couldn't. I had a job my father-in-law gave me. I had a life that depended on other people. You built everything yourself, and I couldn't stand it." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you forgive me now?" I thought about my mother, about her wish that her 2 sons would one day stand together. I thought about Dolores, whose knees were finally getting treatment. I thought about the janitors who now had health insurance and paid time off because I had made it a condition of my ownership. I thought about the little boy who used to cry himself to sleep because his big brother called him worthless. I said, "Yes, I forgive you, Kevin, not because you deserve it, because I'm tired of carrying the weight." He hugged me. For the first time in our lives, we hugged. It was awkward, it was brief, but it was real. If you made it to the end of this story, you're exactly the kind of person who understands that respect isn't about titles, it's about character. Hit that like button if you believe that hard work pays off. Subscribe to Miss Cat's Story for more powerful true-life narratives from America's heartland. And leave a comment, have you ever been underestimated? I read every single one. Until next time, keep watching, keep listening. And never forget, the person you ignore today might own the building tomorrow.